Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Hi there, and thank you for listening, whether it's on Progressive Voices via TuneIn, the America One Radio app, via podcast. However you listen, I appreciate you doing that. Launched this show back in October of 2022 to give anyone who wanted to listen the opportunity to sharpen their skills, to leave the show with a few more quills, arrows in the bag, bullets in the chamber, rhetorically, not literally. Let's not go there. In order to take on combatants when it comes to, say, Twitter trolls, those you work with, the loudmouth conservative who thinks he has all the quips. You come in with the facts, you're armed with information, and of course, healthy rebuttals, and it can change the dialogue. It can also help that coworker, or maybe this is someone in your family. It can help that person who has been sort of quiet on the sidelines before and unsure which way to go. It can help them decide the correct course of action when they go to vote in November. I mention this because, that's why this show is here, to inform, to help us coalesce, not just around messaging, because I don't believe we should walk out of any gathering, whether it's just listening and talking with each other or what have you, with common verbiage, but common knowledge. Knowledge is power, and facts matter, or they should in politics. It's been debatable over the last, decade or so. We've seen a sea of Zoom calls. Black women for Harris. White dudes for Harris. Even last night, there was an Irish Americans for Harris Zoom call. I know this because my friend, actor Michael Kelly, was on that last night and was promoting that beforehand. I am not an Irish dude. I opted not to get on it. But I understand the premise, and a lot of those have been for fundraising purposes. Last night was the Republicans for Harris Zoom, which had a lot less to do with fundraising and more to do with something similar to what I started this show to do, which is to provide talking points to help convince family and friends to do what's right. Now, their conversations weren't about policy because facts, data, math, science don't usually work for Republicans, but this is more about preserving democracy and saving this country. And honestly, I sort of believe in their hearts, their own party, from the grips of another Donald Trump presidency. This sort of movement reminds me a little bit of what it was like once former Atlanta Falcon quarterback Michael Vick got out of prison and was eligible to play in the NFL again. I can't tell you how many times I'd see a fan base who had plenty to say when he was an Atlanta Falcon and was found guilty of participating in a dogfighting ring, who would totally change their tune once he was signed to their roster. But there were fans, for example, of the Pittsburgh Steelers who were not excited about their principled and long-storied franchise signing that guy to play on their team. And said so, and protested, and sat out, didn't go to games. Did it make a difference? I mean, maybe, maybe not. But they were principled in what they did. It was actually on this call that Adam Kinzinger, I could find the audio, I'm just not going to, spoke about being in battle and having to take out the immediate threat before dealing with the threat down the road. And that's why this call was so important to these Republicans. And there were like 60,000 people on this call who listened in to take out the immediate threat. The immediate threat to democracy is nearest. The policy discussion and differences with Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, Democratic Party can be dealt with, as Adam Kinzinger said, as a luxury. Having the luxury of having policy discussions and debates. The immediate threat to democracy being first. Anyway, among those on the call were former Georgia Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, former Pence Homeland Security Advisor Olivia Troy, one of the hosts. She introduced him.
Next up, we have someone who has exhibited tremendous leadership, integrity, and who really upheld his oath to the Constitution and the fundamental principles of our democracy, given everything that he and the leadership of his state faced in the aftermath of the 2020 election. I'm honored to welcome former Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, Jeff Duncan.
There we go. I was on mute. I haven't figured out how to use Zoom yet. Thank you, Olivia, for that introduction. And, I've had a front row seat for the current downward spiral of the Republican Party here in Georgia, unfortunately. I've got to see Donald Trump at his worst. I've got to see his followers at their worst. I got to see the maximum amount of pressure put on our state to try to rig an election for him. And fortunately for the Republican Party, fortunately for the country, we were able to withstand that pressure and maintain a fair and legal election despite Donald Trump's best wishes. This is not position A. I've been a lifelong Republican. I was raised in a Republican household. I'm a conservative by nature. That's how I problem solve. And so when I ran for office for the first time in this community here in Forsyth County, Georgia, it was an 80-20 district. I was conservative and still am conservative. I just believe those answers solve a lot of these problems. But I watched decisions be made behind the curtain by Donald Trump. I watched a cult be birthed, and I watched followers just walk off the deep end of the plank for Donald Trump. And so as this started to play out, not just in 2020, but even before, right? We got to see Donald Trump put pressure on us for how we reacted to COVID here against Governor Kemp and myself and several others in decisions that we were making. So I could kind of see this train wreck coming, but would have never have guessed it would have gotten as bad as it got in 2020 with the election. Look, I just want my party back, right? Selfishly speaking, I'm supporting Kamala Harris because I think she's a steadier hand than Donald Trump will ever be. I think it will create an opportunity for us to have 4 years to heal and rebuild this party. I feel so strongly about it. I've even written a book. Many of you all have seen this. Nearly 4 years ago, I wrote this book, GOP 2.0. It played out what would happen if we didn't take our own medicine. And unfortunately, we're here. But thankfully, we actually have an alternative. We have a different solution. And although I don't agree with 100% of Kamala Harris's policies, we do agree on several policies. One is that Donald Trump can never, ever, ever be in charge of anything ever again in this country. And I think it's important for us to remind ourselves, just because we vote for Kamala Harris in 2024 doesn't mean we are Democrats. It just means we are patriots. We're doing our duty to be able to build this party back. And I just continue to remind myself, as Lieutenant Governor, I get to serve as the President of the Senate. And so I worked across party lines because it was important to me, not because I needed the votes, but because I wanted to see policies and laws shape themselves. And so I really buy into what Donald Trump has said. Somebody who's with you 80% of the time is a friend and an ally, not a 20% traitor. And I really think we need to soak that in as Republicans who are going to vote for Kamala Harris. And I want to encourage this group to take this to heart. What story do you want to tell your kids and grandkids? Do you want to tell them when they ask about this election, when they ask about this chaotic period of time, this temporary moment of insanity for the Republican Party? Do you want to tell them that you voted for a morally bankrupt person, a womanizer, an indicted felon, a convicted felon, just because he had an R next to his name? Or do you want to tell them that you had the courage to vote for somebody that was morally decent, that was a steadier hand that you disagreed with on a handful of policies? I hope that answers that you had the courage to vote for somebody that is decent. Last but not least, I know many of you might think that you're not going to just vote for anybody. You're going to show up to the polls, you're going to vote down ballot, and you're not going to vote for the top of the ticket. That's making a point. That's making a point that Donald Trump is horrible. I want you to make a difference. And to make a difference, you've got to vote for Kamala Harris and be able to send Donald Trump packing and never, ever, ever run anything in the Republican Party again. Thank you, and God bless you.
Former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, a Republican here from Georgia, on the Republicans for Harris Zoom call last night, which allegedly had more than 60,000 folks tuning in. The Republicans for Harris Twitter X account with more than 102,000 and growing followers. Is this a large enough movement to make a difference in the election? See, this is one of those deals where I'm not going to sit here and quibble about crowd size the way some people do. I actually don't think it's about the numbers that we see on the social media accounts or the numbers that tune in on a Zoom call. I think it's the folks quietly sitting on the sidelines who aren't going to click follow or like or take the time to watch a Zoom. I mean, my God, who watches an hours-long Zoom call of a pep rally for politics. I don't. I was invited to the white dudes. I had no interest. I don't need to hear this stuff. The Braves were on or something. There was something else to do that night. But I guess what I was trying to say was this is the sort of nod, the permission for the spouse of the MAGA voter, for example, who, may not say as much on the outside about how he or she feels about Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, but just quietly sees that there is a movement telling them it's okay if you want to walk into that semi-private booth, or here in Georgia, hopefully nobody looking over your shoulder while you're at the touch screen, and do what you believe is right. The thing I keep coming back to, however, the more I see movements like this, and the Lincoln Project movement, which is, again, mostly a lot of Republicans who are just disgusted with the ascendancy of the MAGA culture and Donald Trump itself. The snake story, you've heard the snake story. It's like a Native American story. Boy finds a snake atop the mountain. Snake says, please, can you help me get down this mountain? It's really cold up here. I got no food. I don't want to die. And the little boy was like, I don't know, man, you're a snake. So the snake talks the boy into, carrying him down the mountain and putting him in the backpack and carrying him down the mountain. And then as the boy gets down to the bottom of the mountain, he reaches into the bag to pull the snake out, to let it out. And, they go on their separate ways, and the snake bites him. And the little boy goes, well, what'd you do that for? And the snake kind of slithers away, leaving the boy there to essentially die in pain and hissing, you knew what I was when you picked me up. Will Republicans who, like Jeff Duncan or Adam Kinzinger or Liz Cheney, will they, when we get past this fever, when we get past this fever break of MAGAism and this Trump cultism, will they remember who helped them get down the mountain come policy debate time again, and at least find some common ground and, bring back this noble notion of bipartisanship to get things done, even in a sluggish, more slow than us progressives would like, pragmatic path? Yet to be seen. I keep thinking about that parable, but I guess I still want to remain hopeful that the greater good will still prevail once we get past this. We'll see. I told you I had a story about the state election board and ties to the Trump campaign. Of course, duh, you can see it. It's pretty obvious. And we've got new polling to go over as well. The Ron Show on Progressive Voices via TuneIn and the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com. You can find what I'm about to read to you in the show notes later this afternoon, this evening, RonShowATL.com. Follow me at Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram, Threads if you'd like, at RonShowATL. I tend to share these as well. Amy Walter with the Cook Political Report, giving us a summation of some recent polling data. A new Cook Political Report Swing State Project Survey, she writes, conducted by BSG and GS Strategy Group, shows Vice President Kamala Harris leading or tied with former President Donald Trump in all but one of the 7 battleground states. Wow. What a difference 6 weeks makes, right? Overall, she holds a narrow lead of 48 to 47% in those states in the head-to-head. Walter continues, Harris has closed the gap with Trump since the last Swing State Project survey in May, when Trump led President Joe Biden by 3 points overall and was ahead or tied in every one of the 7 swing states. The one state where Trump still holds a slim lead in this report, she writes, is Nevada, though Harris has narrowed Trump's margin by 6 points since May. When you zoom into the data, you can see the breakdown. Let's do this when you include third-party candidates, because in some of these states there will be third-party candidates. With the third-party candidates, overall, Harris has a 46-44 lead, a margin of 2 percentage points, within the margin of error, of course. In Arizona, it's Harris plus 4. In Georgia, it's Trump and Harris tied. In May, it was Trump plus 4. In Michigan, it's Harris plus 2. In Nevada, it was Trump plus 8. It's Trump plus 5. In North Carolina is a swing state according to this data. Harris up plus 2. Pennsylvania, a huge 8-point swing from Trump +3 to Harris +5. And in Wisconsin, we went from tied to Harris +5. When you remove the third-party candidates, again, Georgia tied. The one state that was showing for Trump +5 is Trump +3. This is pretty incredible data. And again, in a matter of 6 weeks, I mean, this is all very encouraging stuff, but this is why you see a lot of folks on the left tweeting and posting on Facebook, keep the foot on the gas, don't let up, yada, yada, yada. This is now not a marathon. It's a sprint. And you know what? I've said this before on this show, I think. I'm wondering if the way this all shook out might actually be a harbinger for future presidential election cycles. We all know we're tired of 2-year presidential or even congressional election cycles. Might this be this sort of aha moment where future candidates and causes say, why get into the race super early? Fundraising, that's why. But why get into the race super early if we can channel all this energy and arrive at the same amount of fundraising? And the Harris Walz campaign has done a lot of great fundraising just in the last 5 or 6 weeks. And actually not just fundraise as well in a shorter period of time, but look at here, win a race. Not that it's won, I'm just saying, foot on the gas, keep at it. Anyway, Amy Walter continues in the Cook Political Report to write, Harris' success in closing the gap is driven by her consolidation of the Democratic base and increased support among independent voters. That is the duh, we told you so thing, right? Been saying on this show for quite a while. My concern about President Biden atop the ticket was disinterest within party ranks and an inability to corral independent voters. The Lincoln Project type Republicans, the never Trumper types, who I think were, if not going to go back and vote for Trump, were just less inclined to vote for Joe Biden a second time, given whatever rationale was driving folks to be less interested in voting for a second Joe Biden term. Just with Democrats looking at this data, you saw back in May that only 85% of Democrats who voted for Biden in 2020 were definitely going to vote for Joe Biden again. Kamala Harris has brought that up by 6 percentage points. It's now 91%. And you have to think, as long as they keep packing arenas with 10, 12, 15,000 people, that's actually going to even get better. Amy Walter writes here, though, Trump, however, continues to hold an advantage over Harris on issues like the border and immigration, +14, getting inflation and the cost of living under control, +6, even though inflation keeps coming down and getting under control under Biden-Harris, and dealing with crime and violence, +4. Undecided voters and third-party voters overwhelmingly say that they are more worried about Harris setting economic policy than they are about Trump setting immigration policy. With partisans now equally engaged, the next 80-plus days will be a battle of inches centered on redefining the vice president's image and defining the issues over which the presidential election will be fought, Amy Walter opines. Republican insiders know that too, which is probably why you see this concerted effort. And of course, when you see one do it, you finally see them all doing it in herd pack mentality, asking aloud on social media, when will Kamala Harris do a sit-down interview? Oh, I mean, they're just rubbing their hands together, waiting for her to do a sit-down with a Lester Holt or someone of that ilk. While Donald Trump avoids that, he'll sit down with Fox and Friends lackeys or Sean Hannity or Elon Musk. Like that counts. Would it please them if Kamala Harris had to sit down with Chris Hayes or someone of that ilk? Rachel Maddow, nice little sit down, a little cozy. Come on. No, they wouldn't be happy with that. That wouldn't be good enough. They want to see Kamala ask tough questions. To them, I say, oh, well, you're not running her campaign. I mean, that's that. I mean, they're upset because momentum is clearly against them. Donald Trump has had perhaps the worst 3 or 4 weeks of his political life. And they don't like the direction things are going. Obviously, you saw the polling numbers, or you heard them anyway. So they want Kamala to do something, a self-induced injury, a cell phone, an unforced error. And I'm not saying that she would trip and fall if she did an interview. I'm just saying she doesn't really need to do anything differently than she's already doing right now. And she has said that she's going to do a sit-down interview at some point in time by the end of the month. And oh, by the way, there's at least one and hopefully 2 or 3 debates coming up where she will be asked tough questions. But right now, stay the course. Don't take your cues from the right. They're not trying to help you. Oh, speaking of right-wingers trying to help out presidential campaigns, there's someone on the state election board who all but asked for a job on a presidential campaign's administration should that candidate win. We will dive into that next when The Ron Show returns on America One Radio and Progressive Voices via TuneIn.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
Now we have 2 things we have to do. We have to vote, and we have to make sure that we stop them from cheating, because they cheat like dogs. I don't know if you've heard, but the Georgia State Election Board is in a very positive way. This is a very positive thing, Marjorie. They're on fire. They're doing a great job. 3 members, Janice Johnson, Rick Jeffries, and Janelle King. 3 people are all pit bulls fighting for honesty, transparency, and victory. They're fighting. Are they here? Where are they? Where are they? Where are they? Thank you. What a job. Thank you.
I mean,
wow.
That already kind of blurs the lines a little bit, does it not? That was Donald Trump at his Atlanta rally giving shout-outs to the 3 Georgia Election Board members who represent the Republican Party who just so happened to also be showing up at his rally. But wait, said the cable TV pitchman, there's more. In today's Politically Georgia blog at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, we'll have it in the show notes at ronshowatl.com later today. Greg Bluestein, Tia Mitchell, Patricia Murphy, Adam Van Brimmer writing. Listen to this. Did a Republican member of Georgia State Election Board lobby for a position with Donald Trump's second administration if the former president wins in November? I mean, who could determine that outcome, right? Certainly not someone on the state election board in a swing state like Georgia. The Guardian reported that Rick Jeffries, a former state senator who was tapped to the board in January, said he proposed himself as a candidate for a regional director of the Environmental Protection Agency to Trump aide Brian Jack, now the GOP nominee for an open U.S. House district seat. He said, I said, if y'all can't figure out who you want to be the EPA director for the Southeast, I'd like to have it. Jeffries quoted as saying to Brian Jack in the report, that's all I said, according to him. That would raise all sorts of red flags given that Jeffries, the AJC folks write, is part of the 3-member majority of the board lionized by Trump for a series of recent votes. The board decided to reinvestigate Fulton County's handling of the 2020 recount and approve a rule that could give partisan county election board members more discretion to question the outcome of votes. Jeffries told AJC insiders what happened is more complicated. He said he turned down the EPA job during Trump's first term and mentioned to friends that he'd consider the job now, but that he never made a formal ask. His quote, I didn't talk to anyone in the Trump administration. It's been a hardship on us ever since Trump mentioned us at the rally, he said, of the former president's praise for Jeffries and 2 other election board members in Atlanta last week. Maybe if you're on the state election board, you don't show up to the Trump rally to get shouted out. Did your presence there maybe trigger Mr. Off-Prompter guy to give you that shout out? I mean, at least you didn't go there and catch COVID and die. He continues, how the rumors got started that I would join the administration is beyond me. It's all just to make us look like criminals. I have emails and voicemail messages that would make you blush. Well, by all means. A spokesperson said Brian Jack has met thousands of activists and elected officials since joining Trump's campaign, and he can't recall any conversation with Jeffries. Quoting, but his position has been crystal clear. Anyone lobbying for a role in a future administration is only hurting President Trump and themselves, and distracting from the campaign before us. Progressive and voting rights activist and former guest on the show, I'd love to have her back on at some point in time, Marissa Pyle, constructed a really cool Twitter thread that I went ahead and retweeted last night at Ron Show ATL if you want to follow that. She writes, with all the attention lately on Georgia State Election Board, I think it's important to draw a clear history on how it got this way, to a 3-2 majority of election deniers with direct ties to Trump, Cleta Mitchell, and more. On the last 5-ish years from firsthand experience, she has sat through a lot of these election board meetings, and as you'll hear her say, they used to be pretty boring, mundane, ministerial sort of gatherings. She tweets, tracking back to 2019 and before the SEB, State Election Board, was a deeply administrative entity. Its main purpose, with the Secretary of State as its chair, remember that's no longer a thing after 2020, was to adjudicate violations like campaigning at polling places, poll worker errors, incorrect ballots. Those meetings took hours and were case after case that was discussed and decided. Parties either came with lawyers or tried to defend themselves, and public comment was brief. Most cases, that she saw anyway, were referred to the Attorney General. Bleak but boring, she writes. Then came 2019, with the advent of new machines. There was more attention on public comment, as disability advocates raised accessibility concerns and people voiced opinions during that time. Still largely administrative, Marissa Pyle tweets. In early mid-2020, when COVID first hit, the State Election Board took the role that a lot of other bodies in other states did to put out rules that made voting feasible. For example, they are the entity that initially rolled out drop boxes in Georgia. She brings the receipts, an AJC article that points out that that's exactly what they did. Post-election in 2020 is when things go off the rails and we really veer into the radicalized environment that we see today. For months, the State Election Board held their meetings on Zoom. Remember COVID? Which, until the chat was disabled, were flooded with threats, harassment, and disinfo-fueled rage. She's got the receipts to that. You can see that in that tweet thread. Getting into 2021, the legislature did what they do best, made it worse. Because of the vitriol directed at the Secretary of State for not overturning the election, they removed the Secretary of State from the State Election Board. This point is also where we start seeing continuous pushing to overturn 2020, investigate, etc., and so on. Between 2021 and today, the State Election Board chair position changed hand 5 times. Turnover driven by threats, harassment, political pressure, and the constant disinformation targeting the board. None served longer than 14 months, Marissa Pyle tweets. Then, in early 2024, conspiracy theorists began to target Ed Lindsay, a member who had long blocked the conspiracy theorist majority. This, combined with attacks from Trump, the Federalists, and others, gained steam for months, and he was forced out in May. She has the receipts for that. His replacement, a GOP talking head, that would be Janelle King, formerly a pundit on Fox 5's WAGA TV, The Georgia Gang. A GOP talking head who worked for Kelly Loeffler, aggressively endorses Trump, and has questioned election results, finally gave conspiracy theorists what they've been working towards for years: control of the State Election Board in a voting bloc. Marissa continues. We saw the consequences immediately. The State Election Board broke open meetings, laws, forced through rules, petitions that previously it had discarded because they exceeded the statutory authority of the board, and most recently reopened, likely illegally, investigations into the 2020 results. This has led to the new 3-person voting bloc on the State Election Board becoming a right-wing cause celeb, from standing ovations at the Georgia GOP convention to speaking tours to shout-outs from Trump at rallies. These 3 have virtually abandoned any pretense of neutrality. Jeffries, Marissa writes, appointed by fake elector Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, has openly talked to media about his discussions with the Trump campaign about a position in a second Trump administration. She shares the Guardian article That is mentioned in the AJC Politically Georgia blog today. Those of us who have been at meetings for the last 5+ years have seen this in real time and witnessed the tension escalate at each meeting. Speakers at public comment who oppose conspiracy proposals are heckled, booed, and hissed at. This is so churlish. State election board members have faced harassment and threats. In 2023, when then-chair Judge Duffy offered a multi-faith inclusive opening prayer, he was threatened with hellfire by commenters, faced an online barrage of attacks, and accused of, quote, blasphemy by attendees. Marissa continues, "Why tell the story now?" she asks. "I think it's important to A, say it hasn't always been this way, and B, show how a war of attrition by election deniers continues to erode systems that protected our democracy in 2020. This is the result of years of assault from the radicalized right. Nothing much else to add, so I'll wrap with this. Know that, long before the state election board was ever newsworthy, there are lots of folks in Georgia who have been working to try to mitigate this freefall. This work is also exhausting, so spare a thought for us. It's a long road ahead." Speaking of election boards and election security, this story from Fox 31 Denver yesterday.
Former Colorado clerk Tina Peters has been found guilty for her role in the 2021 election security breach in Mesa County.
She was facing a total of 10 charges, including low-level felonies. A jury finding her guilty of 7 charges today. Fox 31's Talia Cunningham bringing us up to speed on this verdict and what happens next now. Talia.
You're probably wondering, Ron, why are you in Georgia, covering Georgia and Atlanta politics, bringing this up from Colorado? Remember the security breach, the break-in here in Coffee County? I want you to remember that story when you listen to this story.
Well, Erica, Tina Peters has been vocal about her beliefs when it comes to election integrity, or in her eyes, a lack thereof. After the 2020 presidential election, Peters became a believer that the results were fraudulent. Prosecutors claiming that she was seeking fame and became fixated on voting problems following in Donald Trump's footsteps, and that mentality resulting in guilty verdicts today. Listen.
We, the jury, find the defendant Tina Peters guilty of count number 1, attempt to influence a public servant.
That was just one of the verdicts read aloud today. After about 4 hours of deliberation, the 68-year-old was found guilty today of attempting to influence a public official, conspiracy to commit criminal impersonation, official misconduct, violation of duty, and failure to comply with an order of the Secretary of State. So these charges all stem from Peters breaching Mesa County's election computer system back in 2021. Investigators say Peters used someone else's security badge to give a person affiliated with MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell access to the county election system. Prosecutors say Lindell is one of the most prominent in the nation election conspiracy theorists, and Peters wanted to be associated with the movement to become famous. Secretary of State Jenna Griswold said passwords from those computer systems were actually leaked online, and her team began to investigate. Griswold adds Peters admitted to what she did multiple times, stating this case was really a slam dunk and justice was served.
Just to be very clear, what Tina Peters was trying to do when she compromised her voting equipment is prove Trump's big lie. So election denialism, disinformation truly is dangerous. And that's why it's so important we speak out and speak up to any type of election disinformation.
Meanwhile, attorneys for Peters argued that she was simply doing her duties as a clerk and placed blame on others during the trial. This case did mark the first prosecution of a local official, election official, over a suspected security breach amid the conspiracy theories surrounding the 2020 elections.
So as the astute writers at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's Politically Georgia blog remind us, if that sounds like a familiar plot, that's because it's nearly identical to the charges against officials in Coffee County, Georgia, where pro-Trump activists also copied election data from a Dominion voting systems machine following the 2020 election. The cases are similar, but not yet proven to be directly connected, Mark Neese at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution writes. The primary connection is that both Mesa County and Coffee County were places where election skeptics breached and copied election information. MyPillow founder Mike Lindell may have been involved in both. They continue, election security experts have alleged that the breaches are related, and they've asked the FBI to investigate it as a national conspiracy. The next 3 words are pretty alarming. That hasn't happened. Fulton County charges are still pending against Coffee County Elections Director Misty Hampton and Republican operative Kathy Latham. The other two people charged in connection with Coffee, Sidney Powell and Scott Hall, have pled guilty. This would also be a timely reminder, one of those, may I also point out, might I add, we here on this show have had some concerns. We vocalized those concerns. We've had guests on with similar concerns and the receipts to prove that we should be concerned. Marilyn Marks a great example. We had her on twice in the last 2 weeks from the Coalition for Good Governance. They have been watching as, not just here in Georgia, but in Arizona as well, there have been concerns about the effectiveness, the secureness of the Dominion voting system after these two breaches. And here in Georgia, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and his staff, Gabriel Sterling et al., have told us that there's nothing to be concerned about. Things are very secure with the Dominion voting system and the software that was breached and the passwords that were handed out, and God only knows who has seen it since. I mean, I just woke up to a headline from the LA Times today. Hackers may have stolen the Social Security number of every American. Okay. Should we follow Brad Raffensperger's lead here and just not be concerned about that? Not do anything about that? The LA Times, by the way, giving us some hints on what to do to protect ourselves. I will give you that article in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. They write, if you suspect that your Social Security number or other important identifying information about you has been leaked, experts say you should put a freeze on your credit files at the three major credit bureaus, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. As a real estate agent, I can tell you how wonderful that sounds. It's impossible to get a mortgage loan with your credit frozen. Is it too early for a drink? Actually, I'm just going to go get another iced coffee real quick and come back. We've got new inflation numbers that came out that tell us what we believe the Fed will actually do in September. But will they? Oh, gosh. When the Ron Show returns here on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, ProgressiveVoices.com, via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. Final few minutes of today's show. Thank you for listening. Appreciate that. If you're new to the Ron Show, welcome. Appreciate you listening on Progressive Voices via TuneIn, weeknights 7 to 8 p.m. The show actually airs 9 to 10 a.m. first on America One Radio. We replay 5 to 6 p.m. And then, of course, we've got that brand spanking new time slot on Progressive Voices via TuneIn. I'm very excited about that. You can always listen to the show again, replay it, or share it with your friends. Bring them on in. The water's just fine. Via podcast, The Ron Show, available on all your major podcast platforms. Rachel Siegel at the Washington Post reporting just minutes ago, as I do this show this morning. Inflation eased slightly on an annual basis in July as Federal Reserve officials inch closer to interest rate cuts that will take some pressure off the economy. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics released Wednesday showed prices rose 2.9% year over year, a slight improvement on the figure notched in June. Prices also rose 0.2% over the previous month. The report will probably move central bankers closer to cutting interest rates at their next policy meeting in September. For months, Fed officials, Rachel writes, have said they won't trim borrowing costs until they're confident inflation is easing to normal levels. Now that they've come about as close as possible, Rachel writes, officials are increasingly acknowledging the risks of keeping rates too high for too long. Already, hiring has slowed down and global markets are jittery over whether the Fed might have put too much pressure on the economy overall. I am a college dropout. How am I this smart? Trust me, I'm not Rush Limbaugh or anything like him in that realm. I'm not that arrogant. But I have to admit when I'm right. I was saying this 2 months ago, y'all, that I feel as if the Fed is looking for this soft landing that we've already hit. And I'm not going to sit here and heap praises on a number like 2.9% because it's not all that different than 3.0 or 3.1 or 3.2%, where we've sort of been for quite a while now. And I said, can I find this clip? Let me see if I can find this clip. I said, if not a month, maybe 2 months ago, I feel like the Fed might be waiting too long and taking us closer to a recession if they don't act on rates faster. Right now, they're central rate at 5.5%. So if you're out there shopping for a mortgage loan, for example, by the way, I'm a residential realtor. I know all about that. If you're out there shopping for a mortgage loan and somebody gives you anything better than 5.5%, which ain't great compared to what we were dealing with 2 years ago, but more normal in the last 30 years, or actually last 10. If somebody's giving you a better rate than 5.5%, they're losing money on that loan. So even if the Fed acts in September on rates, it's going to be like 0.25%. It's not going to be huge. It's just going to drop to 5.25. Does that mean mortgage interest rates are going to drop below what they are? Like today, it's like 7.4. I mean, they might dip below 7%. Is that going to make folks get active on the housing market? Man, I hope so. I got 2 listings. I would love to get those bad boys under contract. Anyway, let me see if I can find the clip where I said, the Fed may be waiting a little too long. Okay, back from the Ron Show vault. It took me a minute to find it. You know why? Because I said this way back on April 10th. Wednesday, April 10th. Listen to this. Maybe the Fed just needs to realize that the 3% realm, 3.5, I don't know what the margin would be, becomes the new normal. And really, they may be the only ones with any levers to pull to address it at all. By the way, I'm a realtor and a podcast host and not an economist. I'm just speculating here. I do happen to think that they're the ones with the levers now, not the president, not Congress. There's no action that can be taken by a politician, I believe, that can deal with inflation, because since the Reagan era of politics, federal government and in most cases state governments have pulled back on having any control over capitalism. It's not fully unfettered, but it is largely unfettered. And profit driving at least 50% of the cost of inflation. Well, what's government going to do about that? Specifically when we live in a two-party system where one party doesn't want government to touch capitalism or profit in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Especially in an era where deregulation creates fewer hands on businesses in this country and stock buybacks are not disallowed. Yeah, I almost think the Federal Reserve just has to say, maybe this is the new normal, and lower their core interest rate so that Americans who are putting more on their credit cards, and I mean, that's a dam that's going to burst at some point. I don't know how long down the road, but at some point, Americans' credit cards are going to get maxed out. And then what are we going to do? That's when the economy suffers at some point in time. I almost feel as if anyway, those rates that we're paying to put things on the card because our costs have increased 20% in the last 4 years, it makes you wonder. We have to somehow make that cost less costly, right? Well, who has the ability to do that? Only the Federal Reserve. That was me, April 10th, 2024, talking about the Federal Reserve, maybe avoiding what they're kind of stuck in limbo dealing with now, deciding, do we do this in September? Do we do it at all in October or November? And deal with Donald Trump complaining that they're meddling in the political process. See, if they had done this in April or May or June, they might have avoided that. But all indications are now the Federal Reserve will lower interest rates in September. Or will they? God, if they don't. Oh, my God. And by the way, the one mistake I made back in April 10th, I kept saying that, nobody has the levers except the Federal Reserve. I was actually wrong. Consumers also have the lever. But do you know how hard it is to corral like 100+ million consumers to all act, to coalesce around something? I mean, it would have taken like a World War II effort to ration and you know what? I think I even said something about that back early when this show started, that's something President Biden could have done, one of those fireside speeches where he tells the American public, inflation kind of sucks, seeing it in the 9s and 8s. Yeah, so maybe don't spend as much and cool inflation ourselves. He didn't do that, and I kind of understand why, I guess. No, I don't. Except it would have been hard to herd 100 million cats, but that's that. All right, so that's going to do it for today's show. All the show notes, I do that in each and every episode. Those of you who are new, thanks for listening on Progressive Voices via TuneIn. That's what I do. At the end of every show, show notes go at ronshowatl.com with the podcast. You can follow that at ronshowatl on your preferred social media platforms so that when it's released, it'll be there available for you. And, of course, listen to the show again or share it with your friends via podcast, The Ron Show, on all your major podcast platforms. Back tomorrow. Have yourselves a great Wednesday. We'll see you Thursday.